Welcome everybody, and thanks for attending today's webinar, Everything You Need to Know About Federal EV Funding. My name is Grace Devine, and I'll be moderating for today's presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. First, I'd like to say we're very excited to have Hunter Souders with us as a presenter today. Hunter is our EV Business Development Representative at AssetWorks. Before I pass things over to Hunter, I just want to give everybody a quick heads up. The microphones have been muted, so if any of you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the WebEx chat tool. You should all see the chat icon located on your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool. Please feel free to use the WebEx chat tool to enter any questions during the presentation. Make sure you send them to host, and I'll be happy to field and relay them to Hunter at the conclusion of the presentation for a brief Q&A session. So with that said, I think we're ready to get started. Hunter, I can see your screen and you are good to start.
Thank you. So as Grace said, in today's presentation, we'll be covering everything you need to know about federal EV funding. So as an introduction for myself, I want to start off and just again say my name is Hunter Souders. I am the EV Business Development Specialist here at AssetWorks. I've been with the company for a little under a year now. I have a high passion for the future of electrification and its crucial role in the sustainability of fleet operations. With that being said, I'm very excited to jump into today's agenda and to dive into what we will be covering on today's webinar. So for the agenda, today we will be reviewing the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as an Inflation Reduction Act in further detail. Understanding funding options and goal setting, the importance of building an electrification team, and the role that plays into helping your team maximize funding opportunities, as well as some software and hardware considerations. What kind of funding is available? There is funding available for different equipment, chargers, of course, as well as light duty and heavy duty EVs. It is important to understand that the electrification process consists of multiple different pieces of equipment and that there are funding options available for these different pieces of equipment. It is just a matter of locating these different grants and incentives that are available for the different pieces of equipment and your needs, from level 2 to DC fast chargers and light duty to heavy duty vehicles. Next, we're going to discuss fleet funding and how to find it. Investing in EV charging is more affordable than you think. Governments and utilities offer an array of tax credits, rebates, and grants that can help put your fleet on the road to a more sustainable future. It is important to put your team in a position to be able to locate and secure this fleet funding that is best suited for you and your organization's goals. The bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, signed into law in November of 2021 and September of 2022, respectively, make significant investments in critical infrastructure projects across the nation. This investment includes significant funding to establish a nationwide network of electric vehicle charging stations and funding to incentivize and support the purchase of EVs and other charging equipment. There are sometimes municipal funding options that will provide $500 per asset. There are some that will provide $1,000. And there may even be some that provide $1,500. Again, it is key to find the best suited options for you and then to understand what securing these funds entails. I have come up with a checklist here that I believe is a good base point to run through to understand if the incentives that you are considering are good options for you and your team. First question I like to ask myself is the juice worth the squeeze? And really what I mean by that is the effort that your team will need to put into the chance of securing the funds worth it? It's important to ask yourself these questions and make sure that you're doing the research to answer them. Strings attached. What kind of reporting is required? Consider the level of effort and time required. Is it worth the strings attached to go ahead and apply for those specific grants or incentives? Max amount per unit. Is the level of funding worth it for you to put the time into securing these funds? Reporting. Is what is required of you beyond securing those funds feasible and worth your team or your team's time or your time personally to make the funding received worthwhile? Deadlines. Is this something that I can realistically complete either by myself or with my team by the requested deadline? If the answer is yes, then it is crucial to build your timeline and make sure you have the resources available to execute on the given timeline. Making the judgment on win probability, how big is the pot of funding? Is there enough there for me to have a good probability to win the funds? So like I said, I believe these are a good base level of questions or a good checklist to go through when considering your funding options. And I believe it'll help guide your decision-making process when considering these grants or incentives. All right, so now let's talk about federal funding programs, as there's a ton of excitement around these programs and you will be receiving questions around these from your team. So it is important to understand what is going on around these federal initiatives. Whether or not the federal funding options are a good fit for your fleet, it is still important to be educated on the topic as it is big in the news currently. So we take, for example, the NEVI. There's $5 billion available from the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. This one more geared towards truck stops, not as tailored towards fleets, but there may be opportunities within that fit your needs. You also see there's very generous tax credits, although it can be difficult for public fleets to access. But there are several programs rolling out that are going to be very fleet focused, such as the new EPA truck rebate program, which is coming in the future and definitely something to keep an eye out for. The low and no emission incentives. Recently, we've seen an uptick in the funding for this program. With this, we are seeing more funding opportunities arise, and there could definitely be opportunities for your organization here. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. Curbside charging can provide funding for take-home fleet vehicles within your organization if that is something that you use. There's a lot of excitement around federal programs, definitely, as they are talked about in the news quite often. But there is even more excitement around the state level funding programs. So these may be a better suit. And this is something I want to jump into next. There are several state level funding examples that are typically more accessible for fleets. I've pulled a few California examples and other non-California examples from the massive, constantly updated list of state level funding. Even though there may be a sizable amount of non-California grants, don't be discouraged. There are several other options in other states besides California, which I've placed some examples in here. Even so, with programs like this, there can be challenges, including the application processes. Grant applications can be similar to college applications and be very time consuming. I like to say there's no such thing as a free lunch, so make sure you do your due diligence when considering. Typically, these are first come, first served programs, so it is important to have your deadlines in order and to get them completed in a timely fashion for best consideration. With that, there is a ton of options at the state level and great opportunities for your organization to secure funding. I pulled a few examples here, from the San Juan Valley, Carl Moyle truck replacement program. They're offering up to $410,000 for Class 8 trucks and up to $170,000 for Class 4. San Diego's offering, they have $131 million in funding available, to help service 3,000 medium and heavy duty on-road and off-road Class 2 through 8 vehicles. So that's another great opportunity. New York has the City Clean Trucks program, where they're offering up to $185,000 for Class 8 trucks and $100,000 for Class 4 trucks. Illinois' NEVI program, they've got $70 million in a pot available for applicant to cover up to 80% of applicants' costs. So now I want to take a deeper dive into building out your electrification team, as well as your grants and incentives team. And this is to help give you a better idea of who and what is involved in this process. So for who is involved, a point person is a good idea of someone to have, someone who is responsible for assembling the application and submitting. This could be grant writers, a staff person, yourself, etc. You're going to want to gather information from your technology provider. It's definitely a good idea to establish a contact person at the funding agency. This can be very important. This is someone who is there to field questions throughout the application process, just a good point person to go back and forth with to get your questions answered. It's also very important to give your team a plan. It's important to understand what your site will require, both now and for the future, so to allow yourself to future proof. Give your team a plan. Will your chargers be public, behind the fence, or a mix of both? How many chargers will you require now? Thinking about how many chargers do you plan to have in the future? What chargers? Will they be level 2, DC fast chargers, or a mix of both? Giving your team a plan will help to align your goals from the beginning and give your team a roadmap to success. With that being said, I also want to talk about some software and hardware considerations that are important to know when understanding grant requirements and to make sure you are considering them within your planning. So thinking about CMS, why a charge management solution? Most programs, in addition to the chargers, require a software as well. So it's just important to make sure that the CMS meets your requirements. Is it providing you with access control, load management, advanced reporting, public payment? As you're selecting your equipment, it is important to understand that you can deploy multiple CMS solutions. We here at AssetWorks position ourselves to integrate with multiple charging hardware options, but it is important as you're considering hardware options to check in with myself or my colleagues to discuss the integration and what solution stacks AssetWorks works with and planning your implementation accordingly. All right, so in closing, grants and incentives process requires many people, but here at AssetWorks, we want to make sure that your technology works with our solutions and that you are setting your team up for success. So I just want to recap how important it is to plan ahead. Also want to say, please do not hesitate that as you have questions and as you're building these plans out about your EV fleet journey, feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues with any questions, as we are more than happy to assist in any way that we can. I work alongside Jessica Butler, Chris Bassett, our fuel and EV specialist, as well as Mike Terreri, our senior product manager. Our whole team is available to set up time to discuss your EV needs further and to help you plan. So please keep in touch. I know we covered quite a bit today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, but I want to pass it over now to open up for Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Hunter. So we're now going to open up the floor for some of your questions. Just a reminder, if you have any questions at this time, please send them to host using the WebEx chat tool on your screen. Provided that we have enough time, I'll pass your question to Hunter and he'll be happy to give you an answer. We also have Mike Terreri on the call, who is happy to help as well. So it looks like we have a couple questions. The first one, what would be an example of a bad program to go after?
Perfect. So an example of a bad program to go after, as we mentioned, there's a couple of criteria to judge if something is worth the squeeze or not. As I said, you really want to consider that funding amount, the deadline, the win probability, the reporting requirements that go along with it beyond getting it. For example, a $400 rebate for EV charging stations from a local utility may be too small to go after. Something due next week, probably not enough time, or there's too much of a workload for the internal team to get it completed within time. Win probability, so say there's 20 expected applicants, but only 2 awardees. If there are more experienced applicants, they may have the edge, so it's just something to consider when going after it. Also taking in reporting requirements. Is the funding amount enough to justify any time requirements for reporting, i.e. quarterly annual usage reports? So hopefully this criteria is enough to both to make decisions about go or no go, as well as to defend reasoning as to why your organization is passed.
Great. And another question. How can I justify my decision to not go after a program to my internal leadership?
Perfect. So again, I think this goes back to some of what we just went over previously there, that being making sure that you run through and do your due diligence, running through that checklist and making sure you're checking things off and getting the answers that tell yourself to move on or not to move on. Once you've gone through that and answered your questions that are designed to outline whether or not this is a good fit. Taking those findings back to your team will help you illustrate more clearly and justifiably whether or not a specific opportunity is right for you or your team.
Great. And another one, when will the federal funding programs be available? They said we're hearing funds won't be available until winter of 2023.
So Mike, I actually want to ping to you for this, for the deadlines on applications.
Yeah, sure. And it depends on what program we're talking about specifically. For example, FTA Low No is a federal program that's open now, due in April. So some funding sources for some programs, that's a transit example, are open now. DERA, federal DERA and targeted airshed, have spring open and closed deadlines as well. But many of the NEVI programs are still in that planning stage. There are a few states which have opened those to RFP, but most are delayed. So NEVI, again, and that's not always a program that's best suited for fleet, but that is a program which state by state is starting to roll open. And we can always talk offline too about project specifics or fleet specifics. The EPA programs for the heavy duty, that program just completed public comment at the start of the year. And so that is a longer ways off till opening, but the NEVI programs are starting to open on a state by state basis. Hope that helps.
Yeah, those deadlines can vary based on each case, correct?
Yep, program by program and state by state if it's administered at the state level.
Great, thank you. And any advice for a corporate fleet using a fleet management company that isn't able to pass on clean vehicle tax credits from the IRS?
So this is actually something Mike gave me pretty good insight on when we were talking about tax credits earlier this week. So I am going to touch on you again, Mike, to if you could share that.
It's disappointing, right? A couple of years ago, the leasing companies had whatever tax liabilities they had, they could pass on the credits. Now, if that entity doesn't have the tax liability to claim and pass on credits, it's a major deal. Of course, and Hunter, I know you had the amounts on the screen earlier. For light duty, it's a significant amount of funding, but for the medium and heavy duty trucks now, with the new tax incentive for medium and heavy duty zero emission trucks, it's a much larger sum that we're talking about, $40,000 per unit. And to see that pass is pretty hard and difficult. The answer is if that's you're leasing from if you're leasing those vehicles and the company that you're working with just doesn't have the tax liability to pass it on, there really is no alternative to it, unless of course you were to purchase the asset yourself, claim the tax credit and other incentives. What you as an owner or what they as a fleet management company should still be able to secure, however, are rebates if you're in certain states. For example, in California, a Class 8 truck can qualify for, depending on the program, between $200,000 and $400,000 per unit, which is pretty significant. So even if you don't have the tax liability, even if you can't claim the tax credit for yourself, there's still other incentives that can be stacked on that are fairly significant.
Thanks, Mike.
And it looks like this person has a question about finding EV passenger vehicles that meet Buy America for Low No or 5,307.
I'll jump on that too. Yeah. So we're fortunate that there's been some ambiguity about what vehicles qualified for Buy America. The legislation that was passed this fall required Buy America for EVs. And there was a lot of question about what vehicles would qualify and which would not. IRS has since released a bulletin clarifying make and model eligibility. So we do have that, and can either share that by email or if we're quick enough, maybe in the chat, but we can definitely follow up by email with Grace if you can mark who asked that question.
Yes, definitely. And another, are there any significant funding opportunities of Cali that are relevant to fleets?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. Um, yes, generally in most major metro areas, utilities can provide make-ready assistance for electrical upgrades that are up to the charger stub out. So some states with generous funding programs that can include Colorado, New York, and actually, in fact, many others. And those were some of the examples that I actually had up on the slide earlier. Um, it is important, though, to do local research and identify organizations that can refer your team to opportunities. Some communities will have a Department of Energy, Clean Cities organizations that will run newsletters which notify fleets of these opportunities. That can be a great resource to go and look for them. In other cases, technology vendors themselves can actually be a resource of available programs. And they'll actually give you insight into things like winnability and level of effort, which we talked about earlier.
Great, thank you, Hunter. So it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. I'd like to thank you all again for attending today's presentation. Hopefully you all secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. Hunter and Mike, I'd like to also thank you on behalf of AssetWorks once again for sharing your expertise with everyone today. As you see, we have both Hunter and Mike Trury on the call. So if you have any questions today, you can always email them. And I hope you all have a great day. We look forward to having you with us next time.